meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Dale Earnhardt was once asked, when did car racing begin? He replied, when the second car was built. That's really not too far from the truth. What he failed to mention was that right after that race, the first argument over the car racing rules also occurred. By the mid-1890s, associations of automotive enthusiasts were creating rules for auto racing, and the arguing continued. There were those folks that supported the small independent builders with limited resources and wanted to have rules that restrained the automotive superpowers of their time. The automotive superpowers preferred to exploit their advantage. It was this tension that led to the creation of the first Grand Prix in 1906. Let's take a look at how that came down. Sometime after the race that Dale Earnhardt mentioned, the arguments began. Most notably posted by Count de Dion, who just wanted to make sure that everyone was playing by the same rules, regardless of whom the rules favored or didn't. This eventually led to the creation of the Automobile Club of France, the ACF, in 1895. The original main purpose of the club was simple: create rules for car racing. Other nations followed. Germany, England, the USA, and others also spontaneously created car clubs to officiate races. At the same time, publishers sponsored races with their own rules to grow the sensation of automobilism and thus sell papers, Gordon Bennett being particularly noteworthy in this regard. His Cup race was the first attempt at a truly equal and unilateral international car race, though it did have its flaws that we'll talk about shortly. The various national clubs and business moguls organized races, rallies, hill climbs, and other automotive events throughout the first decade of the 20th century. Be it the German racing circuit, the British rallies, the French pan-European marathons, the American Vanderbilt races, car racing was all over the place in a big way. Every car club and or racing organizer wanted to create a world standard for auto racing, which would of course take the world's agreement to make happen, and the first to do this to some extent was Gordon Bennett. He began his Cup races in 1900, and bones of contention were thrown across the track from the beginning. One of the rules of his races was that each nation could enter a maximum of 3 cars in a race. For some countries, this was fine, as they only had a handful of automakers capable of putting together a race car and a team. For other nations, this was a penalty for excellence. Their auto industry was far more developed and could race many more teams than these. France was particularly vocal in this issue. At the turn of the 20th century, the largest automakers in the world were in France. The country had more automakers than the rest of Europe combined. France was the hotspot for automotive technological development. The Automobile Club of France could easily provide 2 or more dozen teams to a race. Why should they not be allowed to? By 1905, things had come to a climax. The rules of the Gordon Bennett Cup did allow the winning nation to officiate the next race, and France won both the 1904 and 1905 races, but still had to abide by the rules they hated. At the same time, Gordon himself tended to do things socially that were not good press for the automotive industry as a whole. The die was cast in 1906. The ACF essentially told Gordon Bennett to get stuffed and began their own racing circuit. They decided on a closed-circuit track that they could race on instead of cross-country, and selected 64 miles, 103 kilometers, of roads around the French city of Le Mans. And the rules were simple. There weren't many. Gone were the restrictions on how many cars you could enter. Gone were the limits on engine size, just total weight of the vehicle. If you can build and race a car to compete with the juggernaut that was France, bring it. They named this event Grand Prix de l'Automobile Club de France, or Grand Prix for short. The gauntlet was thrown down, and in a sport so dominated by testosterone, it was not ignored. The big bad bully on the block just challenged anyone to beat them on their own turf, no holds barred. And oh yeah, there were two nations that had a grudge to settle, Italy and Germany. There were political grudges between these three going back centuries. And when the green light was given to have essentially no rules, they all built race cars of epic proportions designed for pure speed. The biggest, baddest automobiles the world had ever seen. Who could build the best race car? That was the focus of this race, and not as much on the driver. The winning nation was based on where the car was built, not who drove it. This concept was new to autosports. Like modern races, this race also had sponsors: Dunlop, Continental, and Michelin tires. Pneumatic tires were still a new thing and had challenges, so they agreed to supply tires to all the entrants and make some changes to the track itself. Instead of just dirt or clay, they sprayed the entire 64 miles of track with tar. The idea was that it would make the roads less dusty and thus the race more enjoyable to watch. In practice, it tore up the tires of all companies and ended up an embarrassment. I'll talk about that in a moment. Now, 32 teams showed up for the race, and with some absurdly powered cars. 23 of them were French, 3 Italian, and 6 German cars. Look at this beast, driven by Felice Nazzaro. This Fiat has an engine of some 18 liters and puts out 130 horsepower. This is 1906. He came in second, by the way. Albert Clement himself drove this 100 horsepower Clement Bagnard. These are some massive engines. And that tar on the road was a serious problem. On the day of the race, it was quite sunny and hot, over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It was hoped it would reduce dust and also improve traction to allow for safer turning at high speeds. However, the actual result was the road became too rough and sticky for the tires, no matter what brand. The dirt under the tar was, like all roads of the time, full of horseshoe nails, and they mixed with the tar. There were some racers that had 10 flat tires on a single lap due to this. Ultimately, the race was won by the Hungarian driver Ferenc Sis, driving a massive 90 horsepower French Renault. The ACF would continue to organize Grand Prix races through to World War I and beyond, and Le Mans is a tale for another day. Today's Grand Prix racing is as much, if not more, about the car as it is the driver. And we have to thank or blame the French for that. Dale Earnhardt had nothing to do with it. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.